She was changing behind a towel, Mr. Wynne, not a locked room. The camera caught it. That makes it fair documentation. That's what Janevra Skoll, vice president of the Elder Grove Bluffs HOA board, said while sliding the violation notice across the table toward me. The grainy black and white photo, my 12-year-old daughter Isla, halfway through changing into her swimsuit, was paper-clipped to the top. Her bare shoulder was visible. Her eyes, blurred but unmistakable, were cast down. It wasn't surveillance. It was predation. Janevra leaned back in her chair, folded her hands over the clipboard, and smiled like we were just disagreeing about hedge trimming. "This image," I said, tapping it once, "was captured from a camera that wasn't installed by the HOA. It's streaming to a masked SSID I just traced from the pool's east quadrant. The signal still pings back to one of my servers, because the camera installer reused an open-source firmware I wrote 5 years ago." Her smile died on contact. Subscribe now if you believe HOA power should never be used to violate a child's privacy. Because what you're about to hear isn't just corruption. It's surveillance, enabled by a board, and it ends today. My name is Malric Wynne. I'm a digital risk assessor and a forensic metadata auditor. My clients include federal contractors, 2 state prosecutors' offices, and a public education cybersecurity task force. And I know what weaponized voyeurism looks like when it's masked as neighborhood safety. Janevra shifted in her seat. Isla had used the cedar cabana for months now. All the kids did. It was the only semi-private corner near the HOA pool, shaded by a wide cedar, fenced on 2 sides, and usually draped with towels when the girls needed to change quickly between swim sets. Isla would bring 2 towels, one for the ground, one for privacy, and whisper-scream at her friends not to peek. She laughed in that cabana. She felt normal there again. We moved to Elder Grove Bluffs for its quiet, for the signs that said family first. After the last time, when Isla was doxxed by a live-streaming app glitch, Lucine and I had promised her, no more digital eyes, no more half-safe neighborhoods, no more pretending normal meant safe. And then this still frame appeared in our mailbox. No postage, no return address, just a printed violation warning us about ongoing behavioral concerns, and advising that decorum violations may result in fines or probationary status. Probation. For being filmed while undressing. "I understand you're upset," Janevra said now, her voice syrupy with faux empathy. "But the HOA has a duty to maintain community standards. The board reviewed the footage. Nothing was distributed." "You watched it," I said. "You watched my daughter change." The silence was immediate. I reached into my bag and placed a network printout on the table. "This is the SSID signature for the camera's private router. It triangulated to a location 47 feet from the pool, mounted above 6 feet. It's not part of the HOA's approved camera grid, and the MAC address is registered to a home router inside your residence." Janevra's son was Candler Skoll, 22, jobless, and recently evicted from campus housing over conduct violations involving digital equipment. "You're throwing out dangerous accusations," she said sharply. "And you're sitting on civil and possibly federal exposure," I said, "depending on how long that feed was active." Lucine stood beside me. She didn't speak yet. She didn't have to. Her FBI credentials hung from her neck. We hadn't told anyone who she worked for. Not because we were hiding, but because we were trying to live. Trying to give Isla a school year where she didn't flinch at cameras or wonder where her photos might end up. Lucine had spent the last 3 nights recovering deleted video segments from a temp buffer linked to the SSID. One of them showed Isla. Another showed 2 other girls. One girl looked barely 9. Janevra's mouth opened like she was going to say something righteous, but nothing came. "I want every board member who saw that footage to write their names down now," I said, "because the case report will name all of you. And this was just the start. Where are you watching from? Because this isn't just a neighbor problem. It's a blueprint for how power abuses privacy and how far some of us will go to fight back." I left that meeting with the violation letter still crumpled in my hand. The board didn't say much after Lucine stood up, and that silence, more than the words, told me they knew exactly what they were doing. Not one of them asked where the footage came from. Not one of them asked how long that camera had been there. We didn't drive home right away. Isla was still at her swim lesson, and I didn't want her to see my face while I was still shaking. Instead, Lucine and I parked 2 streets over and walked the long way back through the neighborhood. Elder Grove Bluffs had the kind of suburban Polish that lured people into thinking nothing bad could ever happen. Neatly spaced mesquite trees, perfect gravel borders, identical beige stucco houses, HOA mandated lighting posts that made every corner look too clean. We passed 2 neighbors walking their dogs. One gave us a nod. The other, a woman in a garden hat I'd seen at the last cookout, paused a little too long. "I heard what happened," she said softly. "At the meeting." Lucine and I stopped. The woman glanced over her shoulder. "It's not the first time." That sentence, that one quiet, offhand comment, reached deeper than the letter ever did. We stepped to the side, off the walkway, behind one of the decorative boulders lining the cul-de-sac. Her name was Talia. She lived on Ridgetop Lane and had 3 kids, one of whom had also used the Cedar Cabana. Last fall, she got a letter about visible undergarments and was told by the HOA to encourage more modest poolside routines. "But there weren't any cameras back then," she said. "I assume someone just reported it." Now she wasn't so sure. 2 more parents came forward that afternoon. One brought their daughter's old citation, a generic warning about unbecoming conduct during HOA-monitored events. The description was vague, the date was clear. It matched the time a seasonal block party was held near the splash fountain. Another girl had changed shirts behind the pool's towel rack that day. Someone had seen her, or recorded her. Each story piled like sediment, separate but layered, compressed by silence. By evening, Lucine had started a timeline on our whiteboard wall. Names, dates, letter headers, image formats. Her handwriting was small and even, but the rage behind it came through in how tightly she circled every instance that linked back to the Skoll residence. We weren't the first. We were just the first with the skill set to prove it. But the damage wasn't only digital. Isla came home after her lesson unusually quiet. She didn't ask for her towel, didn't joke about the frogs by the pool lights. When I asked how class went, she only nodded and went upstairs. Lucine waited a few minutes before following her. I stayed behind in the kitchen, still staring at the wall of notes, trying to find the missing piece. The footage had been retrieved from a camera with no HOA records. The router was unauthorized. The stream passed through a VPN, but used software Lucine and I both knew. Open source surveillance firmware patched last year by a disgraced dev team. I knew the tools. I'd helped design the patches. But that meant someone in our neighborhood wasn't just violating policy. They were customizing software with full intent to conceal. I looked out the back window. The pool was 3 blocks away, but the angle of the cedar tree came into view if you stepped out onto the garden stones. That was when it hit me. It wasn't just a breach of privacy. It was a pattern of control. Someone, likely Janevra, possibly others, had turned surveillance into culture, had taught people to see watching children as a form of enforcement. And instead of checking themselves, the board had rallied behind community standards. I pulled open the HOA newsletter archive on my laptop. The language was subtle, but there, phrases like maintaining visual harmony, modesty in shared zones, proactive observation, and protection through participation. They'd been soft conditioning the entire neighborhood to accept the act of being watched, not for safety, but for correction. That's what made it dangerous. This wasn't a rogue camera. It was the natural result of a belief system. And it was still growing. I saw Owen Ferris for the first time since the meeting the next morning, standing beneath the arbor at the end of the community path behind our row of homes. He wasn't in uniform, just jeans, a tucked-in polo, and that clipboard he never seemed to put down, even when he was off the clock. He looked like a man trying to disappear inside a routine. He wasn't part of the HOA meeting last night. That was deliberate. The treasurer position technically didn't require attendance unless financial votes were scheduled. But I knew better. Owen had been there when the camera budget was denied last fall. He had pushed back then, quietly. I remembered the minutes. He questioned redundancy, overreach, something about conflating observation with policy. Janevra cut him off before he finished. Now he was checking sprinkler heads like nothing had happened. I didn't say anything at first, just watched him test one valve, then another, until the spray arched too far and doused the walking path. He scribbled something, adjusted the pressure, then caught me in his peripheral and froze. "Afternoon," he said cautiously. I nodded once. "Can I ask you something?" He sighed, then motioned toward the bench under the olive tree. "Just don't record me." We sat. The breeze stirred, carrying chlorine and hot pavement with it. He didn't look at me, just at the row of pool cabanas in the distance. "You knew about the camera, didn't you?" I asked. His jaw shifted. "Not at first." I waited. "She told us it was part of a trial. Just one camera, mounted for temporary deterrence. Said it'd stay up until the spring vandalism wave passed. Never went through the full vote. Just a text thread between board members. Not even an official memo. No minutes, no disclosure." "Did you know it was recording kids?" He winced. Not directly. I assumed it was pointed at the far gate, the one with the lock that kept getting jammed. When I asked to see footage after that scooter theft last month, Janevra said it was already wiped. Did you believe her?" His silence answered that. I leaned forward. "You know what this is now. You know this wasn't about property damage or vandalism. My daughter's in one of those videos. Your name's going to be on the insurance filings. You're the treasurer. If this becomes civil, you'll be pulled." His fingers tensed on the clipboard. "I didn't authorize it, but you didn't stop it." He looked at me then, eyes hollowed out by something deeper than shame, guilt fused to fear. "Do you have access to the board emails?" I asked. "The unofficial ones, from when Janevra pitched the trial." He hesitated. "Why?" "Because I need to know how many people were complicit. Who knew? Who voted, even informally? Who watched? Who stayed silent?" "I'm not a whistleblower," he said, but it sounded like a question he was testing out loud. I didn't answer. After a moment, he tapped his clipboard against his thigh, eyes still on the cabanas. "My grandson swims. Here," he said quietly. "He changed behind that same cabana last week. His towel fell. He cried the whole way home. We thought it was embarrassment." He finally met my eyes again. What if it wasn't? It landed like a spike between us. He didn't need to say more. I stood. "If you decide to do something," I said, "it might not just help my daughter. It might protect yours, too." He didn't follow me when I walked away, but he didn't go back to checking sprinklers either. Back at home, Lucine had just finished cross-referencing the known SSIDs from the Skull residence with old router registration logs from previous HOA security initiatives. The same masked broadcast signature, Cedar PTX 105, had appeared during a charity event 2 years ago, meaning this wasn't the first time the feed had been active. I told her about Owen, about the bench, about the grandson. She didn't say anything, just wrote his name under the wavering column on the whiteboard. 3 columns now: compliant, silent, wavering. We needed one of them to break. The retaliation came less than 24 hours after I spoke with Owen. A yellow tag was duct taped to our mailbox, bright enough to be seen from the curb. It read, "Pending suspension, property decorum violation for 2. No envelope, no postage, not even folded, just stuck there, public and humiliating. It flapped in the wind like a warning flag. Lucine peeled it off carefully. "They're trying to smoke us out," she muttered. I unfolded it. The alleged violation? Untrimmed landscaping near public path. The shrubs in question were 6 inches over the edge of the HOA's decorative rock line, something no one in our section had ever been cited for before. Half our block had similar growth, but only our mailbox had a tag. "Second violation?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "So the first was the indecency citation. That means they're escalating." Lucine nodded. "Next one's finable. After that, it could trigger board-level discipline or even legal mediation." They were following their handbook, not the official one. The silent version, the one where intimidation came in the form of paper, procedures, and selective enforcement. I didn't trim the bushes, not yet. Instead, I spent that afternoon walking the entire perimeter of Elder Grove Bluffs with a digital scanner clipped to my hip. Every time it pinged a masked SSID or anomalous broadcast, I logged it. I wasn't looking for open Wi-Fi or obvious networks. I was hunting silent transmitters, the kind used by motion-triggered cameras operating under stealth protocols. By dusk, I had flagged 3 more, one near the community playground, one behind the splash pad, one aimed at the northeast picnic zone. None were HOA authorized. Every one of them used variations of the same base firmware I helped write before it was forked by gray market devs. Every one of them hid behind a firewall that looked amateur, except for one. The strongest signal came from the same masked SSID Owen had once questioned in the fall meeting. The signature was renamed now, but not rewritten. Lucine called that evening while I was at the far end of the walking trail. Isla didn't come out of her room after dinner. My stomach twisted. Did she say anything? She's quiet. She drew something on the fogged mirror, then erased it before I walked in. What was it? A cedar tree. I didn't respond. My mind was already back at the cabana. I had walked past it twice on my scan run. From a distance, it looked like every other corner of suburban life. Benign, bland, beige. But I knew what it had become. A silent stage, a watch stage. I found myself walking faster. By the time I reached home, Lucine had cleared the table and pulled up the HOA bylaw repository on her laptop. They rewrote Section 6F last year, she said. The surveillance clause. I scanned it. The updated clause used soft language, supplemental coverage, auxiliary observation, temporary passive monitoring, a loophole big enough to drive a van of hidden cameras through. And it had been passed by executive vote, meaning Janevra and 2 other officers had signed off without community approval. They've been preparing this system for longer than we thought, I said. It's structured deniability, Lucine replied. They bake in ambiguity so they can retroactively cover overreach. She turned the screen. The list of signatures included Janevra and C. Skull, labeled as external consultant. I froze. He doesn't even have an official role. He does now, Lucine said. They classified him as digital security consultant on the HOA's technology budget. And guess who approved the invoice? Owen Ferris. I stepped back. He didn't mention that, I said quietly. Lucine didn't look surprised, because he didn't want to admit he signed it. That changed things. If Owen approved the contractor line, even under pressure, then he was legally tied to the camera installations, whether he meant to be or not. Lucine closed the laptop. Malric, she said. We're not dealing with negligence. This was structured, engineered. I looked at the yellow violation tag on the counter. A second citation, a warning of what was next. The war was no longer digital. They were using paper now. I didn't sleep that night. At 2:13 a.m., I was still at my desk, the soft hum of my server rack filling the room like a second pulse. The violation notice sat beside my keyboard, half folded and stained with ringed coffee marks. But I wasn't looking at it. I was looking at raw data, fragments of packet logs I'd collected from the 3 hidden camera signals. At first glance, they looked clean. Clean enough to pass a routine sniff test. But then I cross-referenced them against old cache logs from a metadata repository I still had access to from a previous audit. That's when something snapped into place. One of the SSIDs wasn't just a repeater, it was a relay. It was sending compressed thumbnail images, not to a storage hub, but to a cloud drive account, still linked to a masked email that had a truncated hash I immediately recognized. Part of a login string once associated with a public school breach in a different county. A breach I had worked. A case I had quietly walked away from once it turned political. I dug deeper. The same email address, when forced through a pattern recognition layer, pulled up an old device ID. And that ID, though anonymized, had pinged once from a public guest Wi-Fi network at Eldergrove Bluffs clubhouse 4 months ago, on the same day as a neighborhood pancake breakfast. The timestamp, 8:41 a.m. The same morning, Isla and her swim team had changed into uniforms behind the Cedar Cabana for a pre-event photo shoot. That was the connection. The feed wasn't just being watched, it was being archived, on cloud, under a layered identity, routed through devices that were periodically nearby but careful to never stay long. And it didn't end there. Lucine appeared at the door sometime before dawn. She didn't ask if I was okay. She saw the screen, saw the trace log, and nodded. She sat beside me without speaking. I know that email, I said after a minute. The structure, the string obfuscation, it's his. Candler, yeah. We stared at the log trail in silence. She picked up her phone, opened an app I wasn't cleared to access, and logged a secure note for her agency. Then she tapped a few keys and opened the raw snapshot file from the Cedar Cabana. The angle was low, upward, targeted. There was no doubt about it. Whoever placed that camera knew exactly what they were doing. "It's not just Isla," she said quietly. "There are 7 folders." My stomach turned. Lucine clicked through, revealing numeric tags, each one time-stamped, organized by event. Swim meet, community fair, Easter egg hunt, all outdoor events. All places kids moved quickly between water, play, and changing clothes. "What's this one?" I asked, pointing to a file labeled 36R Cab Review RO Nord MP4. She clicked it. The file opened on a freeze frame, Janevra Skoll, standing at the HOA office's back patio, pointing up into the tree, gesturing at Candler. The angle suggested a second camera, possibly a phone. There was no audio, but her mouth moved with familiarity, her hands firm and confident. Not surprised, not angry, she knew. Lucine leaned back, expression flat. "That's all I need for jurisdiction." She logged into a secure FBI case locker and uploaded the footage with accompanying data logs, time stamped, layered, verified. But even as she filed the report, I kept watching the frozen image of Janevra, the way she pointed upward, the posture, not casual, not curious, intentional. She wasn't covering up. Something she'd just discovered. She was directing it. I sat back in my chair, letting the room settle around me. "I think Owen knew," I said finally. "Maybe not all of it, but enough." "He's scared," Lucine said. "Of being complicit?" "No," she said. "Of being exposed." There was a difference. A knock came at the front door just after sunrise. I opened it to find a plain manila envelope on the mat. No return address, no markings, just thick paper sealed with a single strip of black tape. Inside, a printed list of login attempts, router assignments, and timestamps, dozens of them. At the top, scribbled in pen, I didn't know what I was signing, but I kept the logs. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. It was Owen, and it was time to move. Owen's envelope sat on the kitchen table like a quiet confession. Lucine sorted through it while I watched her face shift from focus to fury. Every sheet was precise. Dates, IPs, timestamps, access logs. It was everything we needed to confirm that the camera system wasn't just active. It was maintained, accessed, and adjusted over time. Candler's digital signature appeared again and again, and Janevra's device ID logged in at least twice during remote access sessions. "This wasn't passive," Lucine said, tapping one of the pages. "This was reviewed footage. This was monitoring." "And now it's federal," I said. "You can escalate this through CEOS." She didn't hesitate. She initiated a report submission, encrypting the packet and tethering it to the case number she'd opened the night before. The moment she hit send, there was no undoing it. It wasn't just a privacy violation anymore. It was a federal matter under child surveillance and cyber-stalking statutes. The FBI now had everything it needed to initiate a request for a federal warrant. Isla still didn't know. We'd told her that someone had used a camera without permission, that it had been removed, that we were working to make sure it never happened again. But she was smart, smarter than we gave her credit for. That morning, she refused to go to swim practice. She sat in the living room with her knees pulled to her chest, earbuds in, eyes unfocused on the same animated show she used to watch when she was 6. Lucine sat beside her without saying anything. I stood in the doorway, helpless, trying not to let the rage show on my face. The damage wasn't theoretical anymore. It had form now. It had weight. It had names. By noon, I got the text from Owen. "Need to meet. Not safe at my place. Use East Bench." I found him sitting beneath the awning at the old Rose Garden Trail, wearing a maintenance vest that didn't match the temperature. He looked paler than yesterday. His hands trembled even as he tried to act like they weren't. "I'm not trying to protect her," he said before I even sat down, "but I'm trying to survive this." "I'm not looking for survival," I said. "I'm looking for accountability." He gave a tired laugh. "You don't know what this board does to people who push back." "I know what her son does to children." That shut him up. I slid him a printed snapshot from the folder Lucine had compiled. Janevra's reflection captured in the camera's lens, pointing toward the cedar cabana. "She knew it was there," I said. "She directed it." Owen stared at it for a long time. "I thought it was just to stop the vandalism. Some kid spray-painted the back wall last year. I thought this would help catch them. But when you saw those login logs, when you saw your name on the approval line," he looked down. "I wanted to believe I didn't understand what I was signing. But you kept a copy. Because I had a bad feeling. That was enough for me." "Do you know where the backups are stored?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "There's a network drive, not on HOA servers. Candler set it up using a private relay. Janevra gave him a dummy budget line. It's hosted off-site. You can access it?" "No, but I know the alias. I helped set the budget limit. They called it Digital Asset Protection. Said it was to store HOA files redundantly in case of legal events. Give me the alias." He hesitated, then nodded. Lucine ran the search that afternoon using bureau clearance protocols. The alias matched an encrypted server location in a cloud architecture used primarily by offshore hosts. But we didn't need to break it. We didn't need what was inside. We already had what mattered, proof that it existed, proof that it was off-site, concealed, non-disclosed to members, and funded using redirected HOA funds with a contractor who had no business being anywhere near a camera. Lucine turned from the screen. "I'm putting in for the motion. We'll have federal boots by the end of the week." And just like that, the case stopped being ours alone. It became federal. It became real. Owen was waiting on our porch when we got home the next day. He didn't ring the bell, just sat on the top step with his elbows on his knees, watching the street like someone waiting for a verdict. Lucine opened the door, nodded once, and let him in without a word. He carried a flash drive in his hand, sealed in one of those plastic zip bags with the kind of care only guilt creates. His face was red, eyes sunken. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 nights. I didn't ask if he wanted coffee. I didn't ask if he was ready. He was here. That was enough. "I took a full image of the relay server before I removed my access credentials," he said, setting the drive on the table. "I shouldn't have had them in the first place, but I always keep administrative redundancy, even when they don't ask." Lucine raised an eyebrow. "You cloned the encrypted relay?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "Just the directory map, not the contents, but I saved every access log, every user credential rotation, and every invoice the HOA signed with Candler listed as the point of contact." She took the bag and sealed it in an evidence envelope. "I'm not cleaning this," Owen said, voice low. "I signed off on budget items I didn't verify. I ignored my own questions because Janevra said it was all covered, that it was just a deterrent system. You were manipulated," I said, "but you didn't stay silent." He gave a weak smile. "That's a generous reading." "It's also the true one." Lucine handed him a piece of paper, typed and official. "This is a formal whistleblower acknowledgement. It protects you under federal reporting laws. If you're called in as a witness, you'll be identified as a cooperating party." He read it, then folded it slowly and placed it in his pocket. "She'll come after me," he said, more to himself than to us. "Maybe not directly, but through someone. That's how she works." "She's not going to touch you," Lucine said. "Not anymore." That night, the server traffic dropped by 30% across the board. The network ping from the Cedar Cabana vanished entirely. The picnic zone stream dropped to null, and by morning, the signal at the playground flickered and failed. Lucine's team hadn't even made contact yet. They were running, which meant they knew. Around noon, we received an emergency board notification in our inbox. Temporary suspension of community digital infrastructure due to system upgrades and scheduled vendor maintenance. It was so transparent, it was almost laughable. Lucine forwarded it directly to the case agent in Phoenix and flagged it for preemptive tampering. By then, Isla was watching again. Not the cameras, just the people. She sat by the window after school, sketchbook in hand, not saying much. But I noticed the drawings, outlines of trees, cabanas, silhouettes of figures standing just out of frame. Her way of reclaiming space, maybe. Or trying to draw walls around places that had once felt safe. Lucine taped a privacy curtain over the lower half of the patio window, not to shut her in, but to let her sit without feeling watched. We didn't speak about the camera anymore in front of her, but she knew. Her eyes had changed. That evening, Lucine got the confirmation. The case had been accepted under federal child surveillance and exploitation risk statutes. It was moving out of local jurisdiction. A coordinated team was scheduled to visit Elder Grove Bluffs under sealed orders within 72 hours. No arrests yet, Just interviews, warrants, equipment preservation. But that was enough. It meant the system had teeth now. Janevra didn't appear at her usual morning walk the next day. Candler's car hadn't been seen in 2 days, and HOA communication froze. No newsletters, no meeting reminders. The system that had once sent out reminders 3 times a week went dark. But I didn't. Trust silence. That afternoon, Owen sent one last message, a photo of a delivery van parked outside Janevra's house, plain white, no markings, and Candler loading 2 tower CPUs into the back. "They're wiping it," he texted, "or trying to." Lucine forwarded the image. The response came back fast. "Do not engage. Agents in transit." I closed my laptop and looked at the clock. Time wasn't on their side anymore. It was on ours. At exactly 7:06 a.m., the federal request to preserve evidence was issued under sealed warrant. Lucine received the mirrored confirmation seconds later. Agents were inbound, and the scope of the operation had been formally expanded to include both electronic surveillance abuse and financial misappropriation of HOA funds. We didn't say anything when the notice came through. We just looked at each other. It was quiet, efficient. The way this kind of work always is when the paperwork is complete, and all that's left is enforcement. Still, I didn't feel relief. Not yet. Lucine had already prepared the documentation packets, IP logs, budget line items signed by Janevra, Owen's whistleblower envelope, and the directory trees of Candler's alias server, all labeled and organized in a way that only someone trained in digital evidence preservation would understand on site. My job was simpler. I stayed locked on the relay. The masked SSID Cedar PTX 105 had gone dark 2 days ago, but the residual ping still flickered once every few hours. I didn't chase the main server anymore. Lucine's team had full authority now, but I did watch the outer layers, backup relays, cache mirrors, anything Candler might have installed to preserve fragments in case of wipe. That's when I saw it. A ghost ping from a new identifier. PTX Burn 2A. It was faint, but matched the firmware signature Candler had used on the other cameras, almost identical, but this one was broadcasting for just 10 seconds at a time, every 4 hours. Enough to signal a backup, nothing more. I checked the last signal location. It wasn't from his house. It came from the west maintenance shed behind the HOA garden plots. I flagged it immediately. Lucine called it in, but she knew what I was thinking before I said it. "If he's routing backups through HOA utility sheds," she said, "he's trying to outlast the wipe. Or bait a dead trail," I added. Either way, it was sloppy, and desperation always leaves fingerprints. Lucine took Isla to a friend's house just before noon. Not because she was in danger, agents were already canvassing the perimeter, but because we both needed our minds clear. It wasn't about proving it anymore. It was about making sure nothing slipped through. I returned to the timeline Lucine had charted across our whiteboard wall. 7 dates, 7 distinct folder names recovered from the feed. I began overlaying them with community events, digging back through HOA newsletters, social media posts, pool party announcements. Slowly, patterns emerged. Each folder wasn't just time-stamped. They were labeled based on head count. Cab 4 shows 17, short for Cedar Cabana, shoulder camera, 17 children present. SPAD to Uni 09, splash pad, uniform switch, 9 targets logged. The shorthand wasn't random, it was taxonomy. Candler hadn't just installed cameras, he'd organized them into an index, filed, sorted, categorized. This wasn't amateur surveillance. This was a predatory system operating under HOA-funded infrastructure and administrative protection. Lucine confirmed it. "He's built a hierarchy," she said. "He knew what he was collecting, and he knew how to preserve it under budget camouflage. The forensic structure alone could qualify for enhancement charges." That evening, we got a call from the field agent assigned to Elder Grove Bluffs. Calm voice, measured tone. "We'll need access to your original source logs," he said. "We believe Candler attempted to trigger a remote wipe using the van as a mobile purge signal. Your local capture points may contain the only untouched backups." "I already separated them," I replied. "They're stored offline on independent media." "Good," he said. "Hold tight. Next phase is coming quickly." I hung up and turned toward the living room window. 2 streets down, the clubhouse lights were still off. No flags out front, no residents moving in or out. Elder Grove Bluffs had never been this still. But it wasn't peace, it was pressure. A quiet vacuum forming around the board's authority. Janevra hadn't issued a statement. The HOA's website had gone offline. And neighbors were starting to talk. Quietly, yes, but with edge. Suspicion didn't need a megaphone when it had silence to work with. Lucine walked back in, hair tied back, hands clean, face pale. Local law enforcement just received notice, she said. They're executing coordinated knock and preserve orders tomorrow at 6 p.m. Janevra, Candler, and 2 other board officers. I looked down at the photo of the Cedar Cabana one last time. Then it starts at sunrise. I woke at 5:41 a.m., fully alert before the alarm ever had a chance to go off. The air felt still, like it had pressed pause on the whole neighborhood. Not quiet, silent. Even the usual morning sprinklers hadn't kicked on. Lucine was already dressed, black jacket, field credentials clipped at her belt, sealed evidence folder in hand. She gave me a look. Nothing dramatic, nothing rehearsed. Just the silent exchange of people who knew exactly what needed to happen. By 6 a.m. Sharp, the unmarked vehicles rolled in, 3 SUVs, no sirens, no flashing lights, just measured movement and high-visibility vests with federal markings tucked beneath windbreakers. The teams split immediately, one toward Janevra's house, one toward the Skull residence, and a third toward the HOA's clubhouse server room. I stayed in the E's, kitchen, lights off, blinds angled down, not hiding, watching. Across the street, porch lights flicked on one by one, curtains shifted. People didn't come outside, but the neighborhood was waking, slow, confused, suspicious. At 6:07, the first knock echoed, 3 sharp raps, a pause. Then the door opened. Janevra appeared in her robe, holding a coffee mug, her expression unreadable. She didn't shout, she didn't protest, just listened as the agent handed her the warrant. She stepped back, let them in, and vanished behind the edge of the doorway. At the Skull residence, it was different. Candler didn't open the door. The agents waited 30 seconds, then breached it. No resistance. Just silence, then motion. 2 agents entering, one holding the tablet that had tracked the mobile purge relay signal from 2 nights ago. I watched as they re-emerged 10 minutes later. One of them carried a desktop tower wrapped in an evidence shield. Another held a stack of hard drives in separate anti-static bags. The agents didn't speak to neighbors. They didn't explain. They didn't need to. By 6:40, they were gone. Lucine came back inside at 7:02, jacket zipped to the collar, expression tight. They got everything, she said. All server backups, full tower directory. Even found a binder with handwritten login aliases. He'd been cataloging since last summer. Did Janevra say anything? Lucine nodded. She tried to distance herself, claimed she didn't know where the funding went, said Candler was acting as an informal consultant and misunderstood his role. Did she sign the contractor forms? Yes, twice. That was enough. We sat in silence for a long minute. Then the emails started. First came the official HOA cancellation notice. Due to unforeseen legal reviews, all HOA activities are suspended until further notice. Questions may be directed to the board's temporary legal liaison. No name, no contact. Just a silence wall pretending to be structure. Then came the first neighbor message. Talia from Ridgetop Lane. She had heard about the operation. Her youngest daughter had changed behind the Cedar Cabana the week before Isla. I think there might be footage of her, she wrote. Is there a way to verify without exposing anything? Lucine replied personally, carefully, explaining the process, the protections in place, the limits of disclosure. More messages followed, 3 in the first hour, 9 by midday. Quiet panic, threaded with shame, threaded with fury. And in the middle of it all, Owen. He called just after noon. They tried to delete the budgets, he said. Tried to purge the old financial logs from last quarter, but I had backup copies. Are you safe? I asked. Depends how you define safe. Are you still standing? Yeah. Then you're fine. He exhaled slowly. There's something else. An internal memo from 6 months ago. It shows Janevra ordered a discretionary increase in discretionary spending, 10%. Said it was to expand proactive standards oversight. She tucked it into the gardening fund. That meant she'd been preparing the cover for this for longer than we realized. Lucine logged the memo into the federal system and tagged it under motive. By nightfall, the story was already building momentum outside the neighborhood. One of the parents had a cousin in local media. A whisper went out. A camera followed. The quiet wall that had held Elder Grove Bluffs together for a decade was cracking, but the war wasn't over. It was just reaching open air. The next morning started with wind. Not a storm, just that strange electric breeze that sweeps in after too much stillness. Loose HOA flyers blew down the street, the kind that used to be taped to every mailbox with cheerful fonts and hollow reminders about pool hours and shrub trimming. Now they looked abandoned, like artifacts from a regime no one wanted to admit they followed. I walked the sidewalk past 5 homes and reached the clubhouse by 8 a.m. It was locked. Not just the doors, but the access panel itself had been disconnected. A strip of caution tape crossed the front. No signage, no apology. Lucine met me near the garden plots, where Owen waited with 2 large binders in hand. He looked thinner, like he'd shed more than sleep over the past week. "Final ledgers," he said. "Everything from the last 2 fiscal years. No redactions." Lucine flipped them open without ceremony. Every payment to Digital Asset Protection had been logged here, cleared through HOA general funds, signed by Janevra, seconded by a rotating cycle of board members. "What about the discretionary expansions?" she asked. "Pages 36 through 42, highlighted." I watched her trace each page with her finger, lips moving silently as she cataloged every expense, each line of funding redirected from resident services to covert tech infrastructure. There were even false line items labeled pest control upgrades and irrigation analysis. The equipment had been disguised under property maintenance. "It's fraud," Lucine said. "It's structured, intentional misappropriation." Owen nodded. "That's why I'm here." A few neighbors hovered nearby, some pretending to check their mailboxes, others lingering on their lawns a little too long. They weren't ready to ask questions out loud yet, but they wanted to be within earshot when the answers arrived. Lucine sealed the binders and handed Owen a form. "This officially logs your documents into the federal chain of custody. After today, they're no longer yours, but your name goes into the protection file." "I'm not afraid of them anymore," Owen said, his voice stronger than before. "You don't have to be." By 10 a.m., the agents returned. This time, they didn't wear field jackets. They didn't need to. They came with clipboards and authorization sheets, ready to interview witnesses, collect final statements, and prepare the materials for public legal release. The investigation had moved past preservation. It was now transitioning into prosecution. Janevra was placed under a federal gag order. Candler was detained for forensic analysis of his personal devices. Multiple encrypted backups had been located on a network of USB drives hidden in a planter box behind the Skull House. Each contained hours of segmented footage labeled by timestamps, initials, and locations. The Cedar Cabana appeared in over 70% of them. Lucine and I stood beside the HOA pool fence while one of the federal techs confirmed the original camera node had been active for at least 11 months. The firmware? A modified version of the open source code I'd published 5 years ago, adapted and stripped of its privacy guardrails. "He exploited your own work," Lucine said quietly. "He tried to weaponize it against children," I corrected. By early afternoon, the neighborhood had shifted. People were no longer just peering through blinds. They were coming out of their houses, quietly, cautiously. Parents spoke in low tones beside strollers. A few teens lingered near the cul-de-sac, but didn't shout like usual. Even the dogs were subdued. It felt like a place in mourning, not for a person, but for an illusion. Janevra had been the backbone of Elder Grove Bluffs for nearly a decade. The newsletters, the events, the policies, all written with that same sharp politeness, the kind that looked neighborly from a distance but always carried an edge. People followed her because it was easier than resisting. But now there was nothing to follow. And for the first time since we moved in, the HOA board wasn't giving orders. The cabana stood empty, sun cutting through the gaps between its worn planks. No towels, no children, no motion. But I stared at it for a long time. That place had become something else now. A reminder, Lucine touched my arm. "Tomorrow we meet with the agent in charge. They'll start prepping the formal charges." I nodded. "And after that?" We reclaim the narrative. She looked back toward the pool. And we rebuild. The meeting was moved to the community pavilion, not the clubhouse. No one wanted to step foot in that space anymore. The clubhouse had become a symbol of the breach, of the lies, of the silent agreement that so many of them now realized they'd been a part of. But the pavilion, with its open beams and exposed sky, felt less like a trap. 15 folding chairs were set in uneven rows beneath the wooden canopy. By 9 a.m., nearly all of them were filled. No donuts, no HOA flags, no agendas, just people, tired, rattled, and finally willing to listen. Lucine stood off to the side, not in her capacity as a federal agent, but as a parent. Her badge remained in her jacket pocket, and her posture was stiff in that way. Only someone, carrying too much truth, can hold themselves. I stepped forward first. "My name is Malric Wynn," I said, voice steady but low. "I moved here to give my daughter a sense of safety. What happened here violated that. And it didn't just happen to her. It happened to your kids, too." A few heads dropped. Others turned to the cabana, visible in the distance. I continued. "Over the last year, your HOA dues funded a surveillance network that filmed minors without consent. That footage was stored off-site, categorized, and accessed by an unlicensed individual who had no legal clearance to handle private video data, especially not of children." Gasps, small, sharp intakes of air. You could see the panic settle behind their eyes. "I'm not here to scare you," I said. "I'm here to explain how deep it went, and how many people ignored it." I gestured toward Owen, who stood 2 steps behind me, clutching the manila folder he'd brought for transparency. "This is Owen Ferris," I said. "Your treasurer. He approved line items he didn't understand, and when he realized what they were being used for, he came forward. Without him, most of this would have stayed hidden." Owen gave a slight nod. Not proud, ashamed, but resolute. "We've submitted all evidence to federal authorities," Lucine said, stepping forward now. "You will be contacted individually if your children were potentially recorded. All review and notifications will follow strict victim protection protocols." Someone in the back finally spoke. "Was my son filmed?" Lucine didn't blink. "We won't name minors publicly. But if your child attended any HOA-sponsored events near the pool, splash pad, or picnic area in the last year, there is a chance they appeared in footage." That answer hung like frost. A man in a landscaping uniform stood. "And what about Janevra? Where is she now?" "Under federal investigation," Lucine replied, "pending charges related to unlawful surveillance, child endangerment, and financial misappropriation. She has surrendered her devices. Her travel has been restricted. Her authority in this community has been formally revoked." That last part caused a stir. People looked at each other. No one cheered, but you could feel the release, like something long compressed had finally lost tension. A mother in sunglasses raised her hand, then lowered it, then raised it again. "Why didn't we see it?" she asked. "All of us. The way she controlled everything. Why didn't we stop her?" The silence that followed wasn't accusatory. It was collective grief. Because they all knew the answer. It was easier to follow rules that hurt someone else than to challenge the people writing them. "She wrote the language slowly," Owen said, "line by line. A camera called a safeguard, a punishment called a standard, a child's vulnerability called community maintenance. She didn't win because she hid. She won because she made compliance feel neighborly." Someone cried then, softly, not a sob, just the sound of guilt finally giving way to recognition. Lucine let them sit in it. When the emotion settled, I stepped forward again. "This isn't just about cameras. It's about consent, about who we trust to define what's appropriate, what's acceptable, what's safe. We gave power to someone who didn't earn it. And now, we rebuild, not just the rules, but the reasons we follow them." No one argued. No one stormed off. The chairs stayed filled long after the talking ended. Because this time, silence meant something else. This time, it meant people were listening. It took another week before the cabana was taken down. Not by force, not with ceremony. Just quietly. 2 city contractors in orange vests, working in silence while a few residents watched from a distance. I stood across the walking path with Lucine and Isla, arms folded, jaw tight. They unbolted the beams one by one. The cedar panels creaked as they fell, dry and splintered from the sun. The The tree still stood, tall and patient, but the shade it cast didn't feel safe anymore. Not yet. Isla squeezed my hand. "Can we build something else there?" she asked, voice small. Lucine crouched beside her. "We're going to build something better." The HOA board, as it existed, was dissolved. Janevra's formal removal came with a notarized declaration from the city oversight office. Candler's charges had not been made public yet, but we knew the case was advancing. The evidence Lucine submitted was more than enough. Layered footage, metadata trails, dozens of folders indexed with names, dates, and viewing logs. He wasn't getting out of this, and neither was the system that protected him. The federal agents returned 2 more times, not to seize, but to assist. They helped initiate a compliance audit across all internal HOA communications. Every policy passed over the last 3 years was reviewed. Each board member's digital correspondence was archived for legal consideration. The community was placed under temporary administrative stewardship until a vote could be held. Owen was offered a formal exemption from civil liability in exchange for full cooperation and document testimony. He accepted. He still didn't smile, but he stood taller. Lucine hosted a private meeting for the affected families in our home. She printed out victim rights packets, assigned each parent a contact agent, and answered questions well into the night. No one left angry, no one left empty. But they did leave changed. 3 days later, the neighborhood voted on its interim leadership committee. The first decision on the docket was to approve the design and funding for a replacement structure near the pool. But this time, it wasn't a cabana. It was a closed, state-compliant changing station with full ADA accessibility, privacy safeguards, and written transparency requirements for any future surveillance proposals. Add up the recommendation of the committee, it was unanimously named Isla's Corner. The plaque mounted to the frame read, "In memory of dignity, in pursuit of safety, and in defense of every child's right to privacy." I stood there beside Isla at the dedication, watching her fingers trace the engraved letters. She didn't smile, but she didn't cry either. It was something in between, something stronger. Lucine rested her hand on my back. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "No," I said. "We did." And for the first time since that photo showed up in our mailbox, I let myself exhale. The neighborhood would never be perfect, but it was no longer silent. People spoke up now, about things that mattered. They asked questions, they checked signatures, and most importantly, they watched the watchers. We returned home that evening to find 2 envelopes in our mailbox. The first was a letter from the Department of Justice confirming that Candler Skoll had officially been charged under the Video Voyeurism Prevention Act and faced multiple counts of unlawful surveillance of minors. The second was from the city clerk's office, notification that a local journalist had filed a records request into Elder Grove Bluff's financials over the last 4 years. The story had broken. Janevra's name was trending. She would never hold office again. Not here, not anywhere. And her empire of silence had fallen to pieces, not because of outrage, but because someone told the truth. One name, one child, one recording at a time. Isla slept through the night that night. It was the first time in over 2 months. She left her window open, breeze drifting across her covers, and when I looked in on her, she wasn't curled tight anymore. She was lying on her back, one arm draped across her stomach, breathing easy. She felt safe, and that's all we ever wanted. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, if you believe power should be held accountable, subscribe now and share this with someone who needs to know. No matter how deep the silence, it can always be broken.